keep your questions or comments within 1 minute. And just a gentle reminder that Q&A sections is for panelist discussion and not for debates. We also strive to create a safe space here for everyone. So I would like to urge that we maintain respect and also engage in good faith discussion. No derogatory, discriminatory, or vulgar behavior will be allowed. Okay, so right, since there will be 3 speakers, about 20 to 25 minutes each, that's more than 45 minutes. So research shows that we all have an attention span of 20 minutes, and I think mine is shorter. So I've asked my good friends to actually help me out to pay attention as well and WhatsApp me any important takeaways so that I could summarize at the end of the session. All right, so before further ado, let me introduce our speakers. Our first speaker today will be Prof. Venkatesh Atriya. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. He's a chemical engineer turned development economist. Served as a professor of economics at Bharathidasan University, Tamil Nadu for close to 3 decades. He coordinated mass literacy campaigns in the 1990s and has been involved in social mobilization campaigns for gender equality and against female infanticide and feticide. He was the lead author of the Report on the State of Food Insecurity in Rural India 2008 and the Report on the State of Food Insecurity in Urban India 2010. He has written extensively on issues of agrarian change, literacy, gender, infanticide, food security, human development, and political economy. Let's give him a hand. Prof. Venkatesh. Our second speaker will be Michael Propsting, who is a socialist activist and writer residing in Austria. He has published numerous writings in several languages, including Rosa Luxemburg. I'm going to try to say this. Ich bin in Länder unbeschritten. I'm not sure. We will let him share what is the book about. I'm sure it's about Rosa Luxemburg. The Credit Crunch, a Marxist Analysis 2008, and Cuba's Revolution Sold Out 2013. His extensive work on China's transformation into an imperialist power is covered in his book, The Great Robbery on the South, 2013. For some of his publications on Chinese imperialism and great power rivalry, you can actually log into the website www.michaelpropsting.net publications bibliography. Additionally, he is the editor of the website www.thecommunist.net. And our last speaker, our final panelist, is Dr. Michael J. Kumar, who is also commonly known as Dr. Kumar. He is the chairperson of Parti Socialist Malaysia. He served as a member of parliament for the Sungai Siput constituency from 2008 to 2018, during which time he was selected among the top 3 parliament members by the Speaker of the Dewan for prioritizing healthy discussions and focusing on the priorities and interests of society. He has received awards for his work as a caring doctor from the MMA. He played a key role in the coalition against healthcare privatization and accepted the Human Rights Award from Swaram on their behalf in 2007. Additionally, and very importantly, he also rejected a promotion offered by the Sultan in 1998. All right, let's give him a hand. Okay, so we shall give the floor to our first speaker. You have 20 minutes, Prof. When you have 5 minutes left, I will press 1 bell, and then 1 more minute to twice. Okay, but you have an additional 5 minutes if you really have. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, thank you, moderator, for the introductions. And we've all been woken up by the sound system here in the last few minutes. So I don't think I have to worry about your falling asleep. First, at the very outset, I would like to thank the organizers of this important conference for inviting me to participate and to make a presentation. Though I'm an economist by training and professional practice as well as a teacher and researcher for more than 4 decades, I have also been an activist of the left political movement in my country, India, and I'm therefore especially grateful for the learning opportunity that the Socialism 2023 conference provides me. I feel strongly that there must be more such sharing of experiences among the left and progressive activists of Asia, among ourselves. We are far too strongly turned towards the metropolis. I think it's important that we increase intra-Asia exchanges. I bring you also something that Professor Patnaik referred to in passing. I bring you greetings from the fighting peasants and workers of India, who won a historic victory against the rulers of India, forcing the rulers to repeal an anti-people, anti-farmer legislation passed by the parliament. So we said, parliament may make laws, but the street will throw them out. So that's essentially what the farmers and workers did. And although Prabhat referred to the peasantry, this is also a movement in which the workers played an important role. Central trade unions and their platform and so on. So it is a very concrete example of a worker-peasant alliance on the ground, which inspired many of us. Because when the struggle started, to be honest, I don't think a lot of people expected the struggle to win. But this is a remarkable struggle which cut across the RSS BJP ruling party's agenda of dividing people along religious lines, communal lines, cut across caste, and so mobilized a very vast section of the peasantry, especially in the Hindi belt. And that's a remarkable achievement by any standards. When we are in sight of an event, immediately in that event, we don't realize its historic importance. If you look at generally the dismal kind of, not a dystopian kind of feeling we have about the world around us, this was a magnificent victory. It was, of course, not bought at low cost. 700 peasants became martyrs, but this is a fabulous victory, and it really lifted all our spirits. And I want to bring greetings to all of you from this movement. Now also, peasants and workers are on the march on many demands, and they're being challenged hugely by the neoliberal policies, which have been there for a long time, for more than 3 decades, but have been especially vicious under the present government of India regime. And this is in the form of heavy burdens, rising prices, growing unemployment, and loss of livelihood. So that's the background. So it's one thing to talk about some weaknesses in the dollar or some rise in multipolarity and feel good, but the work on the ground is huge in front of us. And it's an extremely critical situation that most of the working people across the world face today. I think it's important for us to keep that in mind. So I will come back to this as I speak. Now, turning to the theme of the conference, I will begin by noting the very vast and complex scope of the theme and the impossibility of doing justice to it, whether in 20 minutes or 21 minutes or 25 minutes. Especially because we live in times of great uncertainty and dramatic changes. When I was invited to this conference, there was no Palestine, genocide by Israel. In just a few days, when that happened, one couldn't focus on anything else. One was only thinking Palestine all the time. It was so difficult to write this paper. I must, honestly share with you that I had to tear myself away from that feeling that when your whole people are being finished up by a ruthless power, and we're all unable to do anything about it. It's quite frustrating. So, in activist life, there are many such frustrating moments. We come through all of them, and we remain activists, and we will go forward. But it is important to keep this larger context in mind. I do agree that, yes, there is an ongoing process of de-dollarization, that is challenging the dominant status of the US dollar in the international economy, though its pace and sweep should not be exaggerated. It's happening, it's very incipient, and it's not clear that it is irreversible. So it may not be there day after tomorrow. So it's something to maybe celebrate briefly, but also not to lose sight of our larger challenges in front of us. Likewise, the world is definitely moving away from unipolarity and the US hegemony that has characterized much of the period following the collapse of the USSR and the East European regimes. That is also becoming multipolar now, with the US-led imperialist bloc continuing to be very powerful and seeking to regain hegemony, but being challenged to some extent by the emergence of other powers and forces. The rise of the People's Republic of China on the world stage and its increasing international influence are being viewed with great concern by the still hegemonic US-led imperialist camp. It's important to keep that in mind again. From a Marxist perspective, I'm going to just take a step back and look at it historically, the whole issue of multipolarity and so on, in a historical perspective. It's clear that Lenin's assessment of imperialism has stood the test of time in certain important respects. Of course, the world has changed a great deal since Lenin's times, over 100 years has passed since then. But the enormous growth of productive forces, as well as the upsurge against imperialism across the world, which have led to a wave of decolonization later, I think these testify to the continued relevance and brilliance of Lenin's analysis. I'm not getting into a debate on Lenin and Luxembourg here, that's not my concern. But broadly, the 100 years behind us show the enormous changes in the balance of class forces across the world. And it's important to keep that in mind and to celebrate it while we can. But this 100 years or so, I would say, is a period of the general crisis of capitalism ushered in by the Russian Revolution. That character has not changed. There are ups and downs and twists and turns, but capitalism continues to be in crisis, and every solution they put forward to resolve it, including, as Professor Patnaik said, neoliberalism, is unable to solve it. So capitalism is in a state of permanent crisis. This does not mean the absence of growth, does not mean the absence of technological advances, does not mean stagnation, but capitalism is persistently unable to address questions facing humanity for over 100 years now, after a very triumphant march in the previous century before that. I think the crisis of capitalism in a general sense is most dramatically seen in the inability of the system to address basic issues of poverty, deprivation, mass unemployment, sustained inflation, recurrent economic crisis. I've talked about economics mostly so far, but the climate crisis, the enormous loss of human lives and resources in wars across the globe throughout the 100-odd years, all arising from the relentless pursuit of profit by metropolitan capital, in many cases together with their junior partners in various parts of the world. Well, this has been the overall picture for about 100 years now, something we lose sight of because we see the triumphant, march of capitalism seemingly in front of us. We forget that it was marching very rapidly across the globe before that. And now it's really, the last 100 years, it has not been able to advance at all in the manner that it would have wanted to. So if you look at things only from today's or yesterday's perspective, you miss out on these things. I think there's every reason for us to be confident that in the long run, history is with us. But at the moment, obviously, we are facing huge challenges, right? The period since the end of World War II, of about 75 years, is quite instructive if you want to look at this in this perspective. There were three major developments of that period around the end of World War II and the general crisis of capitalism from 1914 onwards. Three major developments that were promising from the viewpoint of democratic advance across the world. First, two devastating world wars of 1418 and 3945, the Great Depression of the 1930s, and a debilitating set of inter-imperialist contradictions had greatly weakened global capitalism in that period. Second, a strong socialist camp emerged with the USSR, which had played a crucial role in defeating European and Japanese fascism. Many socialist countries of Eastern Europe, People's China, DRV, and DPRK as members, by the mid-1950s, I'm not getting into this question of assessing the character of each of these countries and pronouncing whether they're socialist or not. That is again not my concern in this lecture. But to point to a generally fundamental change that is happening across the world. These are very, in all these cases, socialist revolution took place in extremely backward countries. And they were facing a completely hostile international environment. And if you don't take those aspects into account and you're unhappy that the socialism, whatever they have built, is not to your liking, that's a separate problem. That's not my concern in this lecture. I want to just underline that because I've noticed that there are other speakers to follow. But I want to make my position clear that I'm not getting into those debates. However, I do recognize that the emergence of these countries would declare themselves socialist was extremely important from the point of view of weakening capitalism on a world scale. One must not lose sight of that. By the mid-1950s, it was estimated that 1/6 of the world's economy, world's territory, and 1/3 of its population lived in countries that considered themselves socialist, though at varying levels of development of productive forces. The weakening of imperialism and the victory of the socialist revolutions had also contributed significantly, and this is the third development, to the victories of national liberation movements across the world, resulting in a global wave of decolonization. It's all familiar to you, but it's important to just recall the history briefly. The generally friendly and fraternal relations between the forces of socialism and those of national liberation during the 1950s and 60s also contributed to the emergence of the non-aligned movement in 1961, following the important Balkan Conference of 1955. This is the setting that we looked at in that period. The period from the mid-1940s to the early mid-70s, therefore, was a period of democratic advance, significant democratic advance. The historic victory of Vietnam being over the mighty US imperialists, being a huge source of inspiration for the left and progressive forces. In India, we used to say, Tumhara naam Vietnam, mera naam Vietnam, sabka naam Vietnam. Saying, your name is Vietnam, my name is Vietnam, everybody's name is Vietnam. This is the slogan in the 70s, the extent to which Vietnam inspired us. People have different opinions on what Vietnam is like now, but I'm saying that this is a glorious struggle. And in fact, when I went to the US as a graduate student to do my PhD, I was completely non-political. If I speak on this platform today, I owe it to the people of Vietnam and to the American movement of that period which fought against the war, the anti-war movement. So these are important movements. And again, as I keep saying, we lose sight of them in the currency of the event. But if you sit back and look at it historically in perspective, you realize how important they are. So this has really changed the whole world, world outlook for a lot of people. So this is a very, very important period. The weakening of imperialism had, been very important to us. But what must not be forgotten? Well, this is happening. Okay, all this inspiration is fine, but what must not be forgotten? That's why dialectics is important. You must look at the contradictory developments of the same period, which is that the imperialist camp remained very strong. And over the same period of democratic advance that I mentioned, from mid-40s to the early 70s, there was also a strong economic recovery in the metropolitan capitalist world. The world economy, capitalist economy, grew at about 5% per annum for about 30 years. Never happened before in capitalism. And the only recession in that period was a blip on the radar in 1958 in the US recession. So, we cannot go into the factors underlying this remarkable achievement of what Prabhat was referring in the morning as golden age of capitalism. But what we need to do mention is that this period of 45 to 73 was also, one where the state played an important role in development in the developing world, and that expansion of those economies helped imperialism in turn to register the kind of growth they did. So there is a symbiosis there that one must not forget. But what we should talk about is that, and again, as I said, I'm not going into in great detail, but don't forget that the West addressed this crisis of demand after World War II, partly by drawing upon the markets that emerged for the West in the developing world, which had earlier been strangled under colonial rule, but partly also by imposing an arms race on the USSR and socialist camp. So all of which meant that the West was able to impose wasteful expenditure. Now, there were other factors, but the high point of this period for us in this hall, from the viewpoint of democratic forces, was the passing of the resolution on the new international economic order. The term itself derives from that occasion. And this is the 37th session of the UN General Assembly. 5 minutes, right? And more 25 doesn't operate. Okay. I can ask for an extension. This is 1974, 37th General Assembly session, a few months after the formation of OPEC and the sharp rise in the oil prices, which also contributed to the recession in the Western world from 1974-75. However, this dramatically changed in the next 10 years. In 74, we had the NIU resolution. In 1986, we had the 9th round of negotiations of GATT, which set the route for WTO and a complete overtaking of the agenda by the imperialist countries. So things can change quite dramatically in a decade. Keep that in mind. Anyway, I will only say that since the time is short, the important feature of this period, post 1975, especially from the 80s onwards, is the rise of global finance capital. And I'm not going to go into why that happened. There are many things, but one or two things can be mentioned. One is, of course, the enormous accumulation of profits in those 30 years of the golden age, so-called golden age. Second was the fact that a lot of the people who entered the labor force right after World War II in the Western world were retiring, and all their post-retirement funds and so on came into the financial markets. The third was the petrodollar phenomenon, which put a lot of dollars in the markets. So by 1980, the international financial system was awash with dollars and liquidity. And this was then brought up the agenda, what do you do with this money? So we have to open the whole world in order to access not just markets for commodities, but also markets for the investment of capital as finance. So this is where your global hegemony of finance capital begins. And I think it's important to refer to that here. And follow up this. And this, of course, meant that the US could do many things in the 80s and 90s, even before the fall of the USSR, but especially after that as well, which meant that you could really bring developing countries under the structural adjustment programs, the impose on them neoliberal policies. The collapse of the USSR and Eastern European countries, the unipolar world emerged with a great deal of euphoria among the ruling classes in the metropolitan world, where the ideologues announced the end of history and the faithful cheered on. They had stubbornly ignored the inherent contradictions of capitalism in an economic system, as an economic system. The decade of the 90s and the first few years of the next decade saw the brutal dismemberment of Yugoslavia, founding member of NAM, the ruthless global imposition of so-called adjustment programs and neoliberal policies, and the coming into being of WTO, the opened up markets for developed countries, and a series of aggressive adventures by NATO in different parts of the world. Again, I'm not going into details, especially on weakening former USSR and regimes in West Asia and South America that were recalcitrant and not willing to toe the US line. The destruction of Iraq under the false pretext of weapons of mass destruction was one of the key events, but both evidence of imperial overreach and developing problems with finance capital were not long in coming. And so by 2008, from the triumphalism of 1991, we moved to the global economic crisis of 2008 in a short period of a decade and a half. So the reason I'm going over this chronology is important for us to realize that things can change quite quickly, and we need to understand what are the underlying forces. Okay, in sharp contrast to the developments of metropolitan capitalism, China was able to achieve sustained economic growth and technological modernization from late 1970s onwards. And of course, the route China traveled is far from autarky. They strategized to secure benefits from WTO membership. They leverage the strengths of infrastructure, skilled labor, and economic planning. So those who believe that China offers a model of neoliberal success are barking up the wrong tree. It is a model of state playing an important role while also adopting certain new policies. All this has to be kept in mind when discussing issues like de-dollarization, multipolarity, and the grand notion of a new international economic order. My own reading of the current literature on de-dollarization suggests that it is at the moment gathering some momentum, but the future remains uncertain, especially as much of the world remains mired in neoliberalism, and the US still retains enormous power over international political economy in both military and economic terms, because all the discussion about de-dollarization doesn't keep in mind the military strength of the US and how it can use it any which way it wants. So, in paraphrasing Mark Twain, one might say, reports of the death of the dollar are vastly exaggerated. As for multipolarity, World Bank has been talking about multipolarity. By the way, if you didn't know it, World Bank and IMF have been talking about it since 2011, so we should be a little cautious in the same terms of appealing to us. There's an agenda there, so one must be alert. Anyway, so what we can say is that yes, it's true that the BRICS group's combined GDP is now exceeding that of the G7 and all that, but this is not a clinching argument for multipolarity. I mean, this is suggestive of a change that's occurring. So what I would like to argue is that, yes, it points to potential, that this grouping can, if it is sustained and operates well, can go further. But if the group holds together, it's not obvious it will, but imagine they call Argentina, and look who you got in Argentina now. So these are the contradictions of the world we're in. Anyway, but don't forget that much of the rise in BRICS share of the GDP globally has to do with China's growth. Comparatively, other countries there have not contributed significantly on the growth of GDP. India in particular has been much talked about, but I know the facts of India are far different from what is often, kind of propagandized in the media. I'm not saying that India is not growing. I'm only saying that the data require far greater scrutiny. Of course, on indicators of human well-being and employment and so on, India's record is not something that one can cheer about. Now, I've said enough to indicate that while I recognize both de-dollarization and multipolarity as trends that seem significant and could even be dramatic over time if sustained, at present, they are very far from being the harbingers of a new international economic order. Except for China, most of the countries seen as contributing to multipolarity follow largely neoliberal economic policies. Not that China does not use those policies to some extent either. Many of them, such as India, are almost de facto junior partners of US imperialism. If one is looking for a multipolar world in the sense of groups of nations that have distinct collective interests from other groups of nations, I'm not sure we will find them. But on specific issues, it is possible to envisage coalitions. Notwithstanding what has been said so far by me, I do believe that multipolarity and de-dollarization ought to be welcome from the point of view of the democratic movements of the world. The idea of a new international economic order has even greater resonance, but it's much further away. Finally, all these issues need to be discussed, not in the way that media discusses it, but from the standpoint of critical political economy and class relations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Nikatish. So that was a total of 24 minutes. Thank you. All right. Yes. Okay. So that was a very honest and personal sharing, as well as a very important, Prof. Venkatish gave a very important historical context and highlighting on the three major developments after the end of World War II. But also reminding us that although de-dollarization is gaining some momentum, but it's uncertain, and sadly, US still maintains enormous power. So that's just some of the summary that I can give. So right now we will welcome Michael. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here, and I hope you can hear me too.
Yes, yes, very well. All right, Michael, you have about 20 minutes. However, I will ring. I don't know if you can hear this. Can you hear this?
No, but I have a clock in front of me, and I promise you, I will I will not speak longer.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I mean, you can speak up to 25 minutes. All right, thank you. The floor is yours, Michael.
Thanks a lot. First, comrades, I want to thank the organizers from the Parti Socialist Malaysia. I hope my pronunciation is correct. I want to thank the organizers for having me at this important conference. And before I start with my presentation, I hope you apologize that I want to spend at least 1 minute to address one very urgent issue. As we are sitting here, our brothers and sisters in Gaza are being slaughtered by the Israeli army. Netanyahu, at this very moment, is attempting a new Nakba, a new expulsion of the Palestinian people of their home country. And my comrades from the RCIT, that's an international revolutionary socialist organization, as well as hundreds of thousands other activists in Malaysia, I'm sure, as well as in other countries, we are on the streets and we are defending the right of the Palestinian people for self-determination and supporting their resistance. And I want just to use this opportunity to say that it is crucial to double our efforts in international solidarity with the Palestinian people. Now, coming to the presentation. I want in my speech, I want to basically outline 5 theses. First, de-dollarization is not a possibility, it is a fact. Second, de-dollarization is the result of the decline of US imperialism and the end of its absolute hegemony. Third, this process is related to the emergence of new imperialist great powers, in particular China and Russia. Fourth, a multipolar world order as a concept is not an alternative for socialists. Unipolar world order, multipolar world order, both are different forms of imperialist rule, and socialists should neither support the one or the other. Finally, the way forward for socialists, for progressive forces, is to build international solidarity, international struggle from below, in order to fight for a global socialist world without classes, without oppression. Now, let me elaborate these theses a bit more in detail. As I did say before, de-dollarization is a process which is already happening. In 2001, the share of dollar in global currencies was 73%. 20 years later, in 2021, this share had declined to 55%. Now, this still represents a large share, but it is clear that this is declining. And related to this, we have seen in the past years the expansion in strength, the expansion in membership of the BRICS alliance. Just a few months ago, 6 new states entered the BRICS alliance. And these countries are increasingly trying to replace the dollar as a currency for their trade. Russia has done this, was forced to do this nearly completely. But China is also never before did China trade with the yuan as much as it has done until now. This is the result of the decline of US imperialism and the emergence of new imperialist powers, in particular China. Let me illustrate this just with a few figures. In the year 2000, when we look at the share of global manufacturing, which is the core of capitalist value production, finance is to a certain degree a superstructure, but it is not the basis of capitalism. The basis is the value production, and manufacturing, industrial production, is the core of capitalist value production. Now, if you look at the different shares of great powers in global manufacturing, you can see China in the year 2000 had a share of 9.8%. And the US at the same time was more than double as strong, 23.7%. 20 years later, in 2021, this has completely changed. China has now a share in global manufacturing of more than 30%, where the US has a share of less than 17%. So it completely did turn around. This is also reflected if you look at the strongest capitalist corporations in the world. As you will probably know, there are different indicators, the Forbes 500, the Fortune Global 2000, Global 500. These are different indexes, but they all agree that China has become very strong. In fact, the number one or the number two among the leading powers. According to the Fortune Global 500 in last year, 2022, China had a share of 29% compared with the US only, in inverted commas, only 24.8%. So China has more capitalist corporations in the world than the US. And you can see the same phenomena if you look at the billionaires around the world. There are different different indexes to calculate it. There's the China Hurun list, the American Forbes list. They slightly differ, but they all agree that the US and China are number 1 and 2 some point. China is number 1, others. The US is number 1. But in the end, it is undeniable that in terms of capitalist power, capitalist corporation, capitalist billionaires, that China has become one of the two, in addition to the US, one of the two leading powers. Now, I think it is therefore clear that China is a leading capitalist power, and therefore it is an imperialist power. It is very clear if you, it's not necessary now to restart quoting Lenin's book about imperialism, but when you look at the criteria which Lenin did outline, it's very clear that China fits into this. Now, the process in a financial sector, in the currency sector, is a distorted reflection. It is distorted because in a financial sphere, the US is still stronger, much stronger than it is in a sphere of capitalist value production. But the process is undeniable. The US currency is declining and other alternative currencies are increasing. Now, let me speak a bit about the issue of multipolar world order. I'm aware that this is a concept which is not only advocated by the governments of China and Russia, but also by a number of left-wing parties. But I think that this concept is neither progressive nor it is realistically. Let me explain what I mean. First, imperialism is characterized by the strife of great powers for domination. For specific reasons, US imperialism was in a position to be the absolute hegemon amongst the capitalist countries after 1945. And when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the hegemony of the US even increased for some time. However, because capitalism as a global system is in decline, just look at the development, the growth rates, productivity rates, etc., etc. It's very clear that capitalism as a whole is in decline. And with it, the hegemonic power, the US, also entered in a process of decline. Now, of course, the US is trying to stop this decline, but it has not achieved this. Now, the point is, the imperialism is characterized by different forms of domination, different powers. But essentially, what is the difference between one imperialist power dominating the world or several imperialist powers dominating the world? It does not make the situation for workers and oppressed better. It does not make the situation for the semi-colonial countries in a global south better. In fact, we had multipolar world order. It is not a theoretical conception. It was the reality in the past. There was a multipolar world order before 1914. England and Germany and France and Russia and the United States, they did all, Lenin described this in much detail in his writings at that time, they all strived for hegemony. And we had the same situation in the 1920s and 30s. There existed a so-called multipolar world order. Different great powers did strive for hegemony. And unavoidable, it resulted in a world war. Now, I think we must be aware that the concept of multipolar world order, as it is advocated by a number of left-wing parties, it is also illusionary, because a multipolar world order can be no world order, because it cannot be a stable order. It is illusionary to believe that different great powers, all striving for hegemony, all striving for more profit, that different great powers could live in peaceful coexistence with each other. This is illusionary. This was never the case. It was never the case in an epoch of imperialism, and neither was it the case before. Imperialists are tigers. They are striving, they are hungry, they are striving for a greater share of of wealth. Therefore, a multipolar world order can only be a world of chaos and crisis. In fact, we have already entered such a world, which is characterized by more wars, more crisis, more instability. And there is no doubt that this process will accelerate in the next years. Now, therefore, this does not mean that socialists should advocate or should prefer, as a lesser evil, the unipolar world order. No, we neither want a unipolar world order nor a multipolar world order. We do not want to have the hegemony of US imperialism, neither do we want to have the strive for hegemony by several different rivaling imperialists. We are socialists. We want to have a world without imperialism and without the domination of great powers. Now, I'm fully aware that this crisis process, this transition process, which exists at the moment, has certain advantages for countries of the global south. And it's clear why. If two, Lenin also said this several times, if two robbers are quarreling with each other, if they are in rivalry and fighting each other, it can only be good for the oppressed because it gives them some space. And countries of the global south, of course, have the right and should try to gain from this situation as much as it is possible. But it is illusionary to believe that this is a long-term solution. It's a short-term tactical advantage for countries of the global south, but no more. It's not so. It's no solution because it is no stable world order. It is a world order full of crises and conflicts and eventually wars. Now, I think it is therefore important that socialists advocate an independent, an independent point of view. We should not support one great power or the other. None of them is the lesser evil. All are worse. Socialists should not strive to ally themselves with one imperialist or another imperialist. But what is decisive is to build an international solidarity of the workers and the oppressed across the borders. The workers of Western countries, the workers of Eastern countries, the workers of global South, the oppressed all over the world need to reach out for each other and to join forces in a struggle against the oppressors, whatever their passport, whatever the color of their skin is. Because the slaughter in Chechnya or in Syria is not better than the slaughter in Palestine or in Iraq or Afghanistan. These are all forms of imperialist domination and oppression. And we as socialists should oppose them, irrespective which great power is committing such crimes. And this brings me to my final conclusion. It is essential to build strong international solidarity across the border. We are just in these very weeks, the last 1.5 months, we have seen the emergence of a strong international solidarity movement for Palestine in various countries, in the Arab, in the Muslim world, but also in the United States, in Western Europe, in South Africa, in Australia. The people have coming out on the streets in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And this is an example what we should do. We have seen trade unions in the United States, in Belgium, in various other countries who have started to boycott Israel arms transport. And this is very good. And we need to have more examples, more such kind of international solidarity. Because the solution is not those at the top, not the capitalist rulers, not one or the other imperialist great powers. It is us. It is the people, the ordinary people, the workers and oppressed, irrespective of their passport and irrespective of the color of their skin. And of course, the only, I did say before, neither a unipolar world order nor a multipolar world order is a solution. The only solution is a world without classes and a world without oppression, a world which we call socialism. And this is what we have to fight for. This is a long-term goal, but there is no short-term solution. The multipolar world order, as I did say before, is definitely not neither a short-term and certainly not a long-term solution. Socialism is the long-term solution. This is why we call ourselves socialists. And I think this is what we should do. This is the goal around which we should unite. Thanks a lot for giving me the possibility to address this conference.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was within 20 minutes. Good job. All right. So that was a really, really insightful sharing by Michael. He reminded us about China being an imperialist power. He also reminded us that the term multipolar or the concept multipolar is probably just an idea, and that the solution is still the socialist solution. And so let's now welcome Dr. Kumar as the third speaker. Dr. Kumar, 20 minutes.
Okay, hello everyone. Okay. Okay, the thing is, my job is very much important because a lot of things have already been covered. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I just tell you that. No. Okay. Okay, today I'm not going to repeat what both the professor has said in Michael Boston. I think a lot of things. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. Okay, this is talking about about de-dollarization. I think I agree. It's in process. I don't want to go and talk about it too much. Oh, it's not working. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, it also what this, the SWIFT. This is the system of transferring internationally. It's under US control. And now the BRICS nations are trying to have an alternative SWIFT that is not under US control, because the US is misusing its power to sanction anyone it doesn't like, right? So, okay, next one, please. Next one, please. Okay, this is talking about, here actually looking at the GDP now. See, nominal terms is when you measure GDP, you look at the prices of all the goods and services that are made in the country, and you add it up and you get a GDP. But the problem with this is, a goods made in China, for example, the same chip, for example, in China, will be worth about 1/5 or 1/8 that chip will cost in the US. So that chip in the US will contribute 8 times more to the GDP than the same chip in China. Or similar say in Malaysia, for example, how much do teachers earn compared to how much teachers in America earn or teachers in Germany earn. So, so the GDP figures, you actually got to inflate. What happened to my slides? Yeah. Okay. All right. So actually, the China GDP figure, if you weigh all the services and goods in China at the prices they are priced in the US, I think the China figure is now more than the US figure in terms of production. And same for India as well. India will be more than Germany. Now, if you measure their production at the same level as prices in Germany, it will be more than that. So the BRICS countries' production in terms of producing things, and you produce things, you're also buying raw materials from all over the world. Your buying of raw materials as well is also going to be so much more than just these figures show. These figures don't show the real picture. And if these guys start then buying not using the US currency, but start buying using either their own currency or the currency of the selling nation, that is de-dollarization as well, right? It's going to take place. Okay, next one. Okay, BRICS. Okay, next one. Okay, I want to go more into this, Next one, please. You see, there have been two kind of international orders since World War II. There was one from after World War to 1990, and the second one after 1990. And if you look at the first 40 years, 45 years, we saw the independence of colonies taking place. We saw the welfare states in Western Europe. There was the developmental decay. There was provision of basic services to the population. Look at Malaysia, for example, We had from the late 50s, 60s, we had, for example, rural electrification. We had clinics built all over the country, all over the rural areas. We had schools. We had EPF coming in. We had SOCSO coming in. So there was actually development. Some of the wealth created in the country was used to improve the quality of living of the people in the country, even the working people, even the peasants, even the people in rural areas. Our life expectancy went up from about 57 years at birth to now it's about 76 or 78. So there's something did take place, right, in those years. And it was because there was a bipolar world. There was a Cold War. And the US and the imperialists were very afraid that the working people will side the other side and they will lose the Cold War, right? They were losing Vietnam, they lost Cuba, Nicaragua, so they were scared. So they're prepared to make concessions, right? And that helped the working people in the advanced countries. In Europe, the welfare state, the social protection that came about didn't come out because of the goodwill of the capitalists. Oh, these guys have worked so hard for me, I'll give them. They gave it because they're scared to go the other side. They had to give it. They were scared. But what happened in 1990, 1991 is when the Soviet Union collapsed. There was no countervailing influence. And what happened was, the true colors of the capitalist the unipolar world came out. And what you saw is there was recolonization by economic means. I mean, let's say, for example, look at Malaysia. We got independence in 57, right? Now, 60 years later, we cannot raise wages, We're scared of raising minimum wages. Why? The FDI won't come. And even our local, domestic, big capitalists will go and set up the firms in Thailand or Vietnam. You want to raise them, you want to raise our taxes, we're scared. If we lowered our taxes from 40% of corporate profits in 1980, now it's down to about 24%. And Singapore is 18%. You guys are forcing us to come down, and Thailand is about 19%. So we are fighting among ourselves, So it's not that the Western powers are controlling us directly. We are free. But we're scared to use our power to raise taxes. We can raise taxes, but we can't really, because then we lose investment, we lose jobs, we'll have unemployment, right? So that means you've been recolonized. We like to have carbon taxes and use the money for green energy, but we can't because carbon taxes means more cost for the investors. They won't invest here, they're going to invest somewhere else. So, there is the hegemony of global capital, including our rich people as well. So we are scared. And then all these guys are informed by these stupid rating agencies, right? Moody and Poor and all these funny fellas, who are actually private. They're not UN, they're nothing, just private. And they're telling the investors which countries are good to invest in, which countries are Musra, who are kind to capitalists, who respect, who are friendly to capitalists. So we give you, BBB and then BB, we get our credit ratings get. So we are bullied, is it? We are bullied by these private rating agencies who tell us our bonds are how good, our government is how good, and then the foreign capitalists don't invest in us because we are got a lower rating. What independence is there? So basically what has happened is the form of development has taken place. We've lost our sovereignty. And then, and also the free trade agreements that we've gone into. The CTPP, CPTPP, okay, how is it called this one? Okay, that one has got sections on investor rights, That means an investor can invest in all these countries, all these countries in the CPTPP have a right to invest in any sector in Malaysia that is open to domestic investment. And if you block them, then you are going against the national principle, the national, what do you call it, national what? National treatment. And they can sue you. They take it in international court and say, I applied to set up something and you didn't give it to me just because I'm foreigner. They can sue us. You cannot have capital controls. You can't tell them for transfer of technology. We have actually sold it off. We sold off all our rights to regulate our industry. So, I mean, that's what's happened. And of course, that leads to cut back on welfare in the West. You can see that happening. And then you see the deindustrialization that's taken place. Like in Africa, I was just there for a conference. And what they have done is, because under the free trade thing, they can bring in textiles, the used textiles or the slightly damaged textiles from Europe. They come and they sell at low prices. And the whole textile industry in Africa has been undermined, damaged. Food production. Now, Africa used to produce food for Europe in before World War II. Now they're importing food, So basically, this is what has happened in the 30 years since the Soviet Union fell. So basically what happened in 1990s, after 1990s, there's a shift of the class forces. You know, the working class, the working people, they lost respect, they lost power, because the capitalists knew there's no other challenge to them, and they could do what they wanted to do. You know, I think Marx talks about that, right? The history of the world is the history of the class struggle. Sometimes hidden, sometimes it's open. I think it's there. So once, I mean, whether the Soviet Union was democratic or whether it was, you know, humane, or was there a gulag, I mean, it's a different issue. But the fact it was there, and it was a different economic system, not based on capitalism and on profit motive, that scared the shit out of these guys for a while. So now, okay, this is Africa. Okay, go on, next one. Next one. Okay, so this is what has happened, you know, there's a big change. So there is a new economic order now. I would say there was a different economic order before 1990. And it's a new economic order after 1990. There's been a recolonization of the third world. So now what can we hope for now? What do you want to do going forward? So what I'll ask the question is, what does a socialist movement in a third world country want to do? You know, and you go to the next one, please. Okay, this is something about Oxford. 2/3 of the new wealth created in the last 3 years was captured by the top 1% of the global population. So basically, what has happened is the new economic order, the new system, allows the richest people and the richest corporations to amass more wealth, you know, and squeeze the rest of us. Right, next one. Okay, the question is, you know, like Michael Prosting was saying, I mean, are we expecting the Chinese capitalists or the Indian capitalists or the Brazilian capitalists to be kinder than the US capitalists? I don't think so, right? I mean, a capitalist is there to make money. He's coming here to, so it's not, we cannot say, so Michael Prosting is right, just because you have Chinese capitalists coming and not US capitalists coming in, it's not a big difference. It's not the same as the Warsaw Pact. When you had the USSR and the Warsaw Pact, that was an economic system that wasn't based on profits of companies, right? It was state controlled. It was a different kind of economy, standing in contradiction to the capitalist system. But here is, so you cannot think naively that this BRICS is a replacement of the Warsaw Pact and things will go back to the original, you know, the better system where people are scared of the third world. No, it's not going to do that because they're not. They're not the same as the Warsaw Pact. Right? Next one. But actually what we need actually, what is the global South needs, whether it's Africa or Asia or Latin America, what we need actually is fair prices for primary commodities. You know, I was reading somewhere like Niger is selling the uranium for like €1 per kg, and the actual price is about 200 euros per kg in Europe. So they're really getting screwed, like, you know, for the amount of things they're producing, the coal, the diamonds, whatever Africa is producing, is being sold at a fraction of the price, the actual value in the West. You know, we need high-tech equipment at reasonable prices. We need sharing of technology, you know. For example, you know, why can't, you know, Malaysia together with ASEAN have its own pharmaceutical industry? Why can't they have our own vaccines? I mean, if Cuba with a population of 12 billion can make 3 different vaccines for COVID, but we cannot do anything, you know. None of us can do anything, hoping that someone from somewhere will give us some vaccine. Why, you know? Shouldn't we be thinking of, so this thing of talking about delinking, that Samir Amin talks about, you know, whether we have regional blocks. So I think what we in the third world have got to talk about is how do we get out of this trap that we are in? The fact we are so dependent on their investment, on their technology. I mean, right now, we're not in a position to tell, get lost. We look after ourselves because, like in Malaysia, our exports in value is 70% of GDP. Our electronics sector, the components, is our biggest export. I think it's about 70% of our export value is there. A lot of jobs as well. And that is not something we can say, get lost, because we need to sell these things back to them, right? We are really tied into, so I mean, I would agree in the longer term, we want a socialist world, we want to be independent and all that, but what is the steps? How do we go? What's the first step? How do we get out of this where we are trapped in? So in that situation, does it help having a unipolar world or a multipolar world? In that situation, is it good having a stronger BRICS? So we have different capitalists we can try and play off If you don't give me technology, will you give me technology? If it doesn't give me a loan, can you give me a loan? So I would disagree with Michael that I think it makes a difference. When you have a multipolar, not that it's going to be solving everything, and it's not the permanent solution either, but to get out of this thing and to build our own self-sufficiency, to build our technology, to work with other ASEAN countries and build local capacity in the region, to do the delinking that Samir Ramin talks about. We need space, we need some room to move. And if US and its gang remain very strong and this tight stranglehold, it's even worse. So I see it as a positive thing. If BRICS becomes stronger, it gives us room, more wriggle room. It's not that they're going to be like a Warsaw Pact and bail us out. No, they're not going to do that. But it gives us room. And also, I'm a bit hopeful about China, because the difference between China and the US is that in the US, the government is in the pocket of the big industrialists, especially the military complex. They call the shots, they call the wars. But I think in China, from what we can see, the Communist Party is still able to rein in the capitalists. It can turn down certain sectors. For example, lately the private tuition sector, they turned it down. I think the gaming sector, they are putting a hand on it. So at this point in time, there is more control over the capitalists in China, not saying they're going to come here and act very nice to us, but there is more control, and there's more control of the surplus produced in China by the state to develop productive forces, to do social protection services, to increase, and wages have increased in China over the last 30 years. The way you look at China now, China is having a huge problem with unemployment. The youth especially, I think the unemployment rate is about 10, 12%. And I think what they would have to do is to shorten the hours of work in a week so that more people can. They got to do things like that, and the state can do it. That's the only state. If any state is going to do that, it will be China, because they are in power and they want to get enough jobs. So things like that, those kind of things may have positive spin-offs here. So I'll keep an eye on China and see, because there's a difference. They're not all equally imperialist. China has a capitalist system now, but it's a Communist Party controlling the capitalist system. Okay, and it's still dominant, and it's quite strict about it. And they are very careful about having their leaders bought over by the capitalists, and they jump on them and they jail them and all that. So there's a bit of a difference, a big difference between China and the US. They're not equal. So I think we need a lot of things to be done. I mean, like saying we need to have the right to redefine trade agreements that we have. The trade agreements, like for example, we have trade agreements with FTA with ASEAN, where 98% of all the goods and services that are imported into Malaysia are without tariffs, zero tariff. And you're not allowed to increase your tariffs. If you had a tariff, it's okay, but you cannot increase it. So now it's zero, of course, yeah, zero. So like, for example, I'm working with the vegetable farmers, right, in Perak. There's zero tariff on vegetables. So when Thailand has got a glut, they've got extra, they just come and dump here, and our vegetable farmers get affected, you see. And over time, what will happen is, you may actually lose our vegetable farmers because they find it's better to go and work in a factory than to plant vegetables. And then there's climate change or there's a war, and Thailand has got no more vegetables to give us, the prices will go up. So I think some things are more important than free trade. I think food security is more important than free trade, right? I think balance of payments, so you cannot kill your domestic industries, So I think there's certain things you've got to redefine. I don't know how this. See, our government has been advised by WTO and World Bank to do all the wrong things, and they've done it, and we've signed up on all these things. And we've been trying this last 2 years, we tried to stop the CPTPP, and it didn't work. And even Anwar also didn't take any interest in that thing at all. And we're really stuck in a very neoliberal situation. Our hands are tied. Even if the left takes over in any of these ASEAN countries, your hands are tied because you've signed all these agreements. So the question is how to get out of these things. And I think having a multipolar world helps you a bit. Because in fact now, the US also is very protectionist, isn't it? I mean, to protect its own markets. So these kinds of things, I think we must see how we can use these various opportunities, because we've dug ourselves into a deep hole. and you got to get ourselves out of it. And next one, please. Yeah, so these are the things we got to do basically. If we take power in any of these countries, we need to develop productive forces, ensure that the largest share of the wealth of the country is kept within the country, can be used for useful things, and use that wealth to improve our people's quality of life, wages, the social wage, environment. That's what we're trying to do. And I think having a multipolar world, having a stronger BRICS, will give us the additional space. And I agree with Michael that we cannot say, okay, once the BRICS gets strong, our problems are solved. No, it's not. But it'll give us a bit of space to try and solve our problems. Next one, please. And I call it a nationalist socialist project, where basically, nationalism, in terms of going back our national sovereignty, you want to take back control of the country. The government must be under the control of the Marhain, the working people of the country, and we use that to push welfare for the masses. So that's the thing. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. That was also well within 20 minutes. So Dr. Kumar gave us an overview of the bipolar and unipolar world as well as what do countries in the global south need, and also how do we unstuck ourselves in a new liberal situation. Okay, so now is question and answer time. As mentioned earlier, I hope that you can keep your comments or questions short, within 1 minute, if possible. So we have we will take 3 questions at a time, and then we will give our speakers to answer. So we have 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's do 3 questions first, okay? All right, our saudara over there. Okay.
Hi. Thank you for a very thorough and actually very fascinating topic. I want to address the possibility of an issue of considering China as a perhaps more benevolent capitalist. I think so. My organization, Innovation for Change, has been working with a few communities in the region that have been affected and impacted negatively by China's Belt and Road Initiative that has been expanding quite in a big way, and resulting in Chinese companies collaborating with their local governments of these countries to take away lands of indigenous people, rural farmers, building dams that has affected the Mekong and creating food security issues across the Mekong. So the problem with this kind of problems that come out from Chinese investment is that people don't know where to go. Nobody has Xi Jinping's phone number, right, that they can call and say, hey, there's a problem here. And because nobody has a confidence that there's anywhere in China that you can go that will address the problems. Because they're not listening. They've been told you are affecting the Mekong region. Please stop building dams. They are not listening. So, and there's a secondary problem with Chinese investment. They're allowing governments that are not getting money from the West because of rights abuses and so forth to now turn to China. Right, so Duterte in Philippines and Hun Sen in Cambodia can say, "Screw America, I'm turning to China," and this has kind of enabled rise of illiberalism. That is a Chinese brand of illiberalism that has now enabled this kind of corrupt governments to take away more lands and rights from their own people. So I'm also wondering, how do we balance that power now? Yeah.
All right, thank you. Your name, please. Pam, right? Pam. Okay. Do you want to address that question specifically to anyone, or anyone could take it?
Anyone, but Siva in particular.
Oh, Dr. Kumar. Okay.
Sorry. Oh my God.
All right. Okay. The second person was over there. this, he had the third question.
Hello? Hi.
Yes, sir.
Sorry. I technically have two questions. I'll just ask them both and whichever
Your
can be
name,
answered.
please?
Oh, my name is Farah.
Farah.
So the first question is that two of the speakers mentioned that de-dollarization is inevitable and is currently happening. Yet, Professor, you said that de-dollarization is uncertain and may not be necessarily reversible. Could you explain your thoughts on why that's the case? And then another question is, in the future where there is a de-dollarized world, right? We talked about the WTO, IMF, World Bank, all these different international organizations. I'm quite curious to see in a socialist perspective, what would an international world order taking into consideration these organizations look like? Would it be a BRICS-led international organization, something along the lines of the non-aligned movement, or would it be a reformation / complete overhaul of the IMF, World Bank, etc.? Thank you.
Right, thank you. And your third question is, Tristan?
Hi guys, my name is Tristan, and I don't have an economics background, so if I ask something stupid by accident, I apologize preemptively. But about a month ago, I saw in the news that the Malaysian government was considering switching the Malaysian reserve to the gold dinar. So I was wondering, what exactly would that change, and how would that affect us in day-to-day life?
Do you want to address it to specific?
No, all three.
Thank you. All right, we will do three first. Okay, can. So we will take Hugh's question. Who would like to take the first one?
Okay. No, you wanted you to respond. Okay. Particularly about your response.
Okay, Afan, no, I think we cannot expect the Chinese capitalists to be any more benevolent than not. In fact, you don't have to go as far as Mekong. I mean, in Kelantan, the farmers that recently are getting out is because of a project together with China. Okay, so but the thing is, we have now filed a case and we stopped it. We got injunction, we stopped it. And we're suing them for wrongfully doing it. Our country, we're suing our government, the PKNP and the PTG, and the state government. We're suing them. Of course, they hate us for it, but so I think we got to fight. We got to hold our governments responsible. I mean, I don't know whether the Chinese company said we just go there and kick them out. I mean, we must have a process, right? If you really want that land for something, a project that's going to create a lot of jobs and a lot of income for Malaysia, fine. I mean, no problem. We don't have a problem with that. What about those 5-6 farmers who are there? Give them some of the land, just don't come there and bash us up. That's all we're asking. So, and that is an internal process. I mean, you can't blame that on can you? I'm not sure you can blame on the Chinese premier, That's our problem with our state. Our state is not doing it. But maybe we can shame them, But actually, it's interesting. At that time, a US media contacted me. And they only gave a statement against China. So I said, our problem is not China. Our problem is our local fellows who are doing this, So I think we also got to be careful about not getting involved, being, we shouldn't be weaponized, So we got to see that.
Thank you, Dr. Kubang. And Prof, you'd like to add?
Yeah, okay. Let me just briefly add to what Dr. Kumar said, that this question of land and displacement is going to be a recurrent problem in development. And the situations on the ground are very complex. This is not to rationalize any particular action by any particular state. But before jumping from whatever are the outcomes in a particular struggle to an overall characterization of a whole society, one must be a little more careful. So in India, for example, we know that there's large displacement that we are fighting, but we also know that if the left runs the state government, extremely limited powers, there are projects for which it may have to acquire resources. It has to then negotiate it with the peasantry. That's what we advocate. Negotiate with the peasantry, because why should the peasantry also be always required to continue to be peasants? Some of them may want to go move out and do other things, but what we're saying is don't use force in removing them. No coercive land acquisition. So these are very complex issues, and I don't think one should jump from an event or an incident there to an overall characterization of a whole society in transition in a very complex world where your main enemy is US imperialism. So choose your enemies. Don't equate China and US. I certainly would not. Whatever would may characterize China as, and I don't agree with all characterizations of China as being, capitalist and all that. It's a very complex, sui generis society. We don't have a word for it. There is a very strong state. As the chairman said, the Communist Party there is very strong, and it is currently, at least, taking a somewhat anti-capitalist position vis-a-vis big capital, trying to rein it in and so on. But you don't know what will happen tomorrow. So I'm not offering any guarantees for the Chinese government. What I am saying is that we are in a state of flux and transition. And these transitions from one mode of production to another are exceptionally complex. They take long periods, and they're subject to so many other uncertainties. So I'll leave it at that. But I also had a question from Farah, right? Oh, sure.
Michael, would you like to add anything to the first question?
To the first question, no. To the second and the third, yes, but no to the first.
Okay. So we will answer Farah's question now.
Yeah, I think Farah raised the question of why do I think that the process of de-dollarization may not be reversible. I'm only saying it may not be reversible. I'm not saying it is irreversible, or I'm not saying it is not irreversible. You see, the death of the dollar has been announced several times over the last 40 years. When the old 1945 deal collapsed in 1971, when Nixon was the president and they went off the gold dollar standard, you had a complete chaos in international financial markets. You moved from fixed exchange rates to floating exchange rates. But after a while, dollar strengthened. And there was this whole deal with Saudi Arabia on petrodollars. Subsequently, as well, there was this 1986 meeting, which tried to, deal with the relationship between dollar and euro and so on. But I think it would be too early to write off the dollar. At the moment, I don't see that. But there are 2 or 3 things here. Okay, one, certainly the point that was made in the other question about Malaysia shifting some of its gold reserves to gold. That's obviously a very good cautionary measure. The dollar is falling, right? But so that's fine. I mean, one can anticipate if dollar is weakening, you can take certain measures. But one cannot sit here and say the dollar will continue to fall. We don't know. There are many other imponderables in the situation. So I would rather, first of all, I would not want to, place my bets for the revolution on either the dollar or polarity. I believe the only class trend mass struggles will take us there. So I didn't go into that in my presentation, but I'm very clear that we are on some other wicket that we are playing. I mean, we don't have to necessarily go by these new terms which have become very fashionable in the media. We must be very clear as to where we stand. And that's a point that the other speaker also made, that we are looking for socialism. But given that I was given this topic, I had to address and do some justice to it. So that's how I look at it. So I don't think that at this moment you can say with certainty that dollar will continue to depreciate and kind of collapse. It's a bit too early to call it. It might happen. It's a bit too early to call it. Will BRICS become another? If BRICS creates an institution like the New Development Bank or something else, will it also be like the IMF, the World Bank? As our chairman said, these are capitalist countries, right? India is exactly not a model of socialism, and Russia is certainly a big capitalist power. What's happening in Ukraine is is a proxy war between NATO and Russia. And just because Russia was one socialist, doesn't become socialist automatically. So BRICS, I mentioned this in my speech. You had BRICS, you called Argentina, and who do you have there now? So these are the kinds of challenges that BRICS will face. So it's all right. It's all right to welcome some multipolarity. And as the chairman said, that gives us some space, some room for maneuver. But one must also not forget that it's a very fledgling group. Linked to that, I just want to relate to a point that the chairman made earlier, which is that, in 1945, the presence of a socialist camp forced finance capital in Europe to enter into a deal with the trade unions, the social contract, which is inevitable because they were scared that the workers would otherwise go over to socialism. That kind of pressure does not come from these other grouping that we're talking about. The fundamental difference in the class character of the system, one must not, overlook that. So that's the difference that I want to talk about.
Right, thank you so much. Michael, you want to take any of those 2 questions from Farah?
Yes, very briefly. I think that look, what would be the alternative to the IMF and the WTO? Of course, these are imperialist institutions and they need to be abolished. In a socialist world, of course, it would be crucial to have indeed an international institution which is under the control of the working people and which would make sure that a massive amount of wealth is being transferred from the first world, from the imperialist countries to the south. Because in the last, since many decades, the imperialist countries have lived from the work of the people in the global south and from the resources and the raw materials from the people in the south. And briefly, look on the question, trying to get advantages. What also Dr. Kuma did raise in his thoughtful contribution. I think that I think it's absolutely legitimate and has to be supported if countries from the global south try to take advantage from the current situation, from the decline of the US, etc. But one must not ignore the tendencies in the world, which are each with the breakdown of globalization. Each great power tries to create its own sphere of influence. And within such a sphere of influence, they will subordinate countries of the South. So in the end, a so-called multinational, multilateral world order will not create more independence, maybe for a short transition period, but in the end, all great powers will create their sphere of influence, and within these spheres of influence, they will dominate and super exploit their in inverted commas, their countries from the global south.
All right, thank you, Michael. Dr. Kumar, you want to add?
Farah is asking about what kind of new international order we're talking about. Okay, can you imagine like countries like Malaysia? Let's say if we can have a deal with countries in ASEAN, Indonesia, Singapore, not Singapore so much, Indonesia, Vietnam. You look at countries which are attracting manufacturing capital, and we are all cutting wages and scared of tax. Main countries are Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, and us. Brunei and all that are not going to adopt, not get. So if these 5 countries can get together and say, okay, we will not cut corporate tax any further. We make it a part of our deal. We go back and revisit our free trade agreement, ASEAN free trade agreement, and we put it in there that we will all not cut corporate tax any further from where we are. And we also, maybe a second deal is over the next 5 years, we will increase our corporate tax from wherever we are in equal stages to 25% or to 30%. So Malaysia has got to go up by stages to 30%. Thailand is going to do the same thing, bigger jumps to get to 30%. So at 5 years, we have corporate tax of 30%. So there's no competitive advantage for companies to jump from Malaysia and go to Thailand because we are all increasing corporate tax. And that's a new world order. I mean, there's a regional order, So I think, and then if we can go and chuchok in the UN with the other group of 37 countries and say, can you guys also do this? So can we use the existence of BRICS to create a new non-aligned movement kind of thing that was started in where? Bandung?
No, 61.
But 55, they already talked about it. Can we get the spirit of that and see whether we can bring issues like that? I mean, the other issues, things like, for example, this whole issue of intellectual property rights. For me, I think that's ridiculous. I mean, how can you own knowledge? Knowledge is based on other people's, every advance in knowledge is based on the advances done by so many other people before. So that knowledge belongs to mankind. It's part of the commons. And these guys put a ring around it and make money out of it for 20 years. I mean, that's totally ridiculous, So how can we chip against that? Can we, at least for the first, bring it down from 20 years to 10 years, what can we do? So I think these are the things that talking about new international order is not just BRICS, even countries like us, smaller countries, can try and see how can we renegotiate our involvement. These are the kinds of things that we've got to think about. And I don't think any other political party in this country is not talking in these terms, is it? That they take the thing as a given, and then how to maximize FDI and make us more, business friendly and bring. That's all they're thinking about. But I think we need to think beyond that. How do we change the rules of the game together with others? How do we do that? And I think that's the kind of international order we should start working towards.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. And Prof. Venkatesh, want to add something?
Just a quick point. And since Dr. Kumar has expanded the scope of the whole thing, the whole experience with negotiations and climate change tells you that if a large number of countries can get together, which are not, part of the big capitalist bloc, that will be useful for defending our position on climate change. So, G77 plus China has been a useful combination in those negotiations. So I worked with the government of India on the draft when the second conference came from Rio +20. We had to fight over every word, every phrase there because the Western countries were trying to impose an agenda on us. And then it helped that we had G77 plus China as one grouping. Same thing with climate change. So there is some advantage to developing countries coming together. Not necessarily one single forum, but maybe several different fora for different occasions. And so one must welcome that. So BRICS, for example, is that way to be welcomed without any illusions about the class nature of the regimes which are now members of BRICS. See, I'm fighting this government in my country, right? That doesn't blind me to the fact that BRICS may be a useful coalition for certain purposes. So that is the limits with which one can talk about. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Now let us take the next round of questions, and this time, Tristan.
Oh, your question about gold dinar. I think the two things, one is whether we're going to put some of our reserves in gold. That's a different question. The other is, are you going to have a gold-backed currency? That's a totally different thing. I mean, but don't forget the US had a gold-backed currency. It's the biggest economy at the time, and they couldn't manage. You have a gold-backed currency means you got to pay the other party in gold if they request it. We have enough gold reserves to do that. If people say, I have your dollar, give me in gold. So to do that, I don't think it's possible for Malaysia to have a gold-backed ringgit. But to keep money as gold reserves, I think that's possible.
So that's to hedge against the dollar. That's to hedge against dollar declining. That's a sensible move as far as the government is concerned. If you think dollar is depreciating, that is the right thing to do. So.
All right, okay. So can I just have a show of hands on how many people have questions? 1, 2. Anyone else have any other? 1, 2, 3. So, all right. So we will have Kueh and. All right. So we will just take 2 questions.
Two questions. Each panel answers, wrap up within 2 minutes. Answer it and wrap up.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you everyone for talking. Earlier, there is some interesting points that I want to ask in response. So earlier, okay. So earlier there are some interesting points I want to ask about. So earlier, 1 or 2 of you mentioned about free trade agreements, the IMF, the WTO. My first question would be, especially to Dr. Kumar, what are the possibilities of Malaysia or other countries doing a united movement or individual movement where we are more active, where we create policies that go against the order or even possibly violate the IMF or the WTO? Because I understand that they do have the legal framework where if we don't follow, we may get dragged to the international court, we may have to pay a fine, we may have to concede certain things, but I feel like if enough of us do it, it wouldn't really matter. And I feel that the West constantly do this. They create agreements, it is favorable to us. Then the very next year, they create a new agreement that is totally not favorable to us, that violates the previous agreements. I don't have any examples, but I'm sure this is something they'll do. So why can't Malaysia or other countries do it to them too? And then my second question would be in regards to what Michael has said. So, Michael, earlier you mentioned that yes, not all the great global powers do eventually turn into so-called villains. But I disagree with that fundamentally, because the context of the Industrial Revolution that created the UK, that created USA, is based on the change of production of labor. And this is something Marxists like to talk about a lot. I don't think the current production changes allow China or even Russia to take this sort of advancement. And also, I want to remind everyone that while China does have manufacturing capability that is increased, they do not have financial control over the world like the West. They do not have military control over the world like the West. They do not have control over the media like the West. So in terms of imperialism, I would say there are a few nuances that are lacking. And maybe there are disadvantages of having Chinese giving resources to other countries, but this have to be judged on a case by case basis. So my question would be, what will happen, let's say, if one day China actually decides to be annexed USA? Are there any countries that will actually oppose it based on their own interests, or do you think other countries will just follow along? Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kueh. And next question.
Hi, I'm Tula. Thank you for the panelists for the esteemed speech. I have two questions, one for Dr. Kumar, one more for Dr. Venkatesh. I just want to get their assessment on Malaysia and India's respective role in the de-dollarization. As we know, we have given Tesla the free rein, and then there's the CPP, so which means we are also going towards the neoliberal agenda. At the same time, PMX is also going to China and telling them that we love Xi so much and we love Chinese investment. So I was just hoping to get Dr. Kumar's opinion on where Malaysia stands.
Sorry, could you please repeat? I distracted him. What's your question? Sorry.
Yeah, it's all right. I'll repeat that. Yeah, I just have a question for Dr. Kumar and Dr. Venkatesh. For Dr. Kumar, where do you assess Malaysia stand on de-dollarization and multipolarity? Because on the one hand, we go to Silicon Valley and we try to ferry in FDIs. We give Tesla the free rein, and then there's the CPP. We also go to China and we say we love Xi Jinping a lot, and then we try to ferry in Chinese investments for Johor and so on and so forth. So where we stand. As for Dr. Venkatesh, there's also India being part of BRICS and refusing to embargo Russian oil. But at the same time, as you pointed out, India is pretty much the junior partner of USA. So where do they stand?
All right, okay. We will now answer the questions.
Okay. First? Okay. But since the last question was India, I suppose I have to answer first. Well, the Indian government, or the Indian state, let's say, or the state, has a very contradictory attitude towards imperialism historically. The Indian capitalist class has always gone back and forth. In the freedom movement, there's a certain part of the national movement which pushed the capitalist class to take anti-imperialist positions, but subsequently, post-independence, there's been a lot of vacillation. Now, within the last 10 years, it's from liberalization onward, 1990s, from Manmohan Singh's time onward, this slant towards the US, strategic partnership with the US, and so on, emerged in the 90s itself. But it's gone much further under the present RSS BJP regime, which is which is looking to a very close relationship with the US, and they're part of Quad, they're part of the I2U2, and on the Palestine crisis, for example, they don't even take a clear-cut stand in favor of Palestine when the whole thing came up in the Security Council. Although today they would say, yes, Israel must withdraw from occupied territories and so on. This is old UN resolution. So they're playing a game. It's very clear that they are essentially junior partners in US imperialism across much of the world. So that is our assessment. The next assessment that the government of India is basically a junior partner, for practical purposes. It may, but that is different from how we deal with BRICS. When it comes to the question of BRICS, yes, there is some space for us to work within BRICS. It's good that India is able to avoid US sanctions and buy Russian oil. I have no problem with that. And if the European countries blow up in Nord Stream and complain against Russia, then you have a problem. So, I'm certainly convinced that this use of sanctions as a weapon is something that must be completely fought against across the world. I mean, these imperial countries, they have no business to sanction us. But for us to operate them on the ground, we need far greater unity among the countries in the south. And then your natural ally, whatever you may think of China's internal system, and I have different views from others. China will be more likely to be the natural ally than the US for sure on those kinds of issues. So it's a complex, field. We must move tactfully.
Dr. Kumar?
Okay, where you asked about the possibility of getting sued, Yeah, I think it's possible. I mean, it depends, like the WTO, the US has been blocking the nomination of the panel for the appeal process. So in WTO, they can't do anything because you go there, even if you lose, you go to the appeal, they can't sit because they don't have the panel to sit. So the WTO has been paralyzed. But you can get sued by private companies because of the ISDS. The ISDS there in several FTAs, but not in the CPTPP. That is being kept out of the CPTPP. But in others, it's there. So that is there. It's not there in the RCEP either. But there are others, and that can be a big pain because they take us and we already signed that. And the countries have, even if you win, you spend so much money. So the better bet would be to build a group of countries to go against, to ask for the removal of certain of the requirements of these trade agreements. You've got to strategize it. See, if you get away with it, you do it. If you can't, you think it's going to be problems, then you've got to strategize. And I think that's why it's important. We need more partners, left, progressive groups in control of different countries. You saw how Venezuela and Cuba work together, Bolivia, So there are more countries like that across the globe. Then we can have a new kind of non-aligned movement, a new kind of third global south. Apart from the BRICS, I mean, the BRICS, we have big capitalists there. Maybe we should, So I think it's the things we got to think about and see how can we promote these kinds of thinking. It's thinking of the next 10 years, So I think we've got to start thinking about these things. Malaysia's stand on de-dollarization and multipolarity. I'm not sure whether they've actually sat and thought about it in the same terms that we are thinking about it, right? I think they're quite opportunistic. They want more FDI. So whoever wants to give FDI, give I think it's like that. And maybe there'll be business interests for the cronies or the close political contacts of certain political parties who will get a deal because they are, I think those are what, I don't think it's ideological. I think it's just driven by the fact you need FDI. And also someone can make money out of it. I don't think it's principled, and that's what my feeling is.
Right, thank you, Dr. Kumar. Michael?
Yes. Yes. One comrade asked the question about China is not such a military power, not such a financial power as the US, and therefore, is it really correct to put China and the US on the same level? Look, first, I think it is important to bear in mind that the Marxist understanding of great powers is not limited to one specific or another specific issue, feature, but to the totality. There always have been in a history of imperialism, there have been imperialist powers with different features. Just think about the world before 1914. At that time, Britain was the hegemonic imperialist power. It had the largest empire with a number of colonies, the largest navy, etc., etc. Compare this with Germany at that time. Germany hardly had any colonies. Russia, Tsarist Russia, hardly had any colonies abroad. Still, they were imperialist powers. All these did change, but in the 1920s, 1930s, Germany even had no colonies at all. Still, it was an imperialist power. So we must bear in mind that there always has been, and there is also today, an unevenness, an uneven development of different great powers. They do not all look the same, and they have different strengths and different weaknesses. And the second point I want to say on this is I think it is important that we look at the great powers and their relevance for the world, not from a national point of view, but an international point of view. We should not look from a national point of view, because it might look very different from different national points of view. You might say, for example, in Malaysia, Russia is no threat at all for Malaysia, and obviously the US has a much larger role plays a much larger role in your country than China does. Albeit China is becoming strong and strong. But in other countries, this might look different. For example, we are collaborating here a lot with the migrant diaspora from Syria, as well as from Chechnya. For them, Russia is a very threatening great power, much more than others. A few years ago, I was in Zambia visiting my comrades there in Africa. Their Chinese capital plays a very strong role. It is Chinese capitalists which are exploiting the workers in Zambia, as well as in other African countries. So it looks different in different national countries. And finally, also think about the Chinese workers and the popular masses. How is the situation for the Chinese workers? I think Dr. Kumar did say that the Chinese regime sometimes jumps on this or that capitalist and takes control over them. And this is absolutely correct. But this does not mean that the wealth of this or that capitalist goes to the popular masses. No, it goes to other capitalists or the bureaucrats. The Chinese capitalism has, when it comes, what does it mean for the workers and the popular masses, has very similar features than other capitalist countries. I do not know if I'm doing this now, you can see the, no, you cannot. I just wanted to show, but if you look at the development of the share of income, you can see in the last 20, 30 years, you can see a very similar development in China. The rich are becoming much richer, and the lower 50%, the lower half of income, their share is totally declining. The workers have no independent trade unions, no freedom to speech. Is the situation in Hong Kong for the Chinese people now better when the Chinese regime is clamping down? I don't think so. So I think we must look at it from an international point of view and not from the point of view of this country or that country. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. Okay, that's all the time we have for this session. So we would like to thank Prof. Venkatesh, Dr. Kumar, and Michael again for joining us.